My name's Adele Onyango and welcome to another episode of Legally Clueless. No, seriously, I have no clue what I'm doing, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Hey you, welcome to episode 118 of Legally Clueless. Thanks for rocking with this pod. I'm really excited to have you as part of the fam. Remember, you can catch up with our online space on Instagram. We're at Legally Clueless Podcast. There's a link to that page in the show notes. And on Twitter, just use the hashtag Legally Clueless. I will find you. However, if you are new here, audio episodes of this podcast go out every Monday morning, and we have a video series on our YouTube channel. Yes, episodes there go up every single Friday morning. So check out the show notes for links to our YouTube channel, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now that that's done, I really need to prepare you for this episode. Actually, the next 2 episodes of this podcast are going to be very heavy. The story that is featured is going to be in 2 parts. I decided to cut it that way because it's a very necessary story, but it's also quite heavy, and I think you need to just take a breather in between the 2 episodes. So here's what you can expect from the first part of the story that you'll hear a little later.
When I was about 5-6 months pregnant, I discovered that he was in another relationship. We broke up. So fast forward, when he was about 3 years old, then I met my ex-husband. During this time, I saw that he couldn't connect with my son at all. And then a few minutes later, he comes back running and he's really crying and he's holding his head. And I asked him, "Hey, what happened?" And he says, "Dad hit me." In the midst of it all, he pushes me out of the house and he locks the gate. So I'm out. I have a 2-month-old baby in the house. I have my son in the house. During this argument, when he was being beaten, my ex called him a bastard. And so he was asking the grandmother, what does a bastard mean?
That's the story by Valentine, and it's going to be coming up a little later in this episode. Well, part 1 of the story. That said, I hope you're doing well. I hope you are experiencing a lot of grace. You know, I'm always wishing you peace. I've just learned that grace fear needs to be in that mix. On my end, I'm not going to talk too much in this episode because I'm really trying to navigate a hectic childhood experience. Could I call it that? So I'm in a space in therapy where we are unpacking and re-navigating just experiences I've had with my late dad and how those have affected me. What I will share is that many a times, so 2 things. 1, many a time we think that stuff that we've experienced or words that have been told to us, or maybe even violence that we witnessed as kids hasn't or does not affect us as adults. It still does. Anything traumatic just finds a place in your even physical body and just rests there. It's hectic. Yeah, unpacking that. And then the second thing that I wanted to share is that, and I don't know if your mind does this as well, which is just like try and erase things that are traumatic or that it deems traumatic. It's like a survival tactic. So I found that many things that I witnessed my dad do are damn near erased. And to navigate them, some of them are coming back up and I'm like, what? I didn't even remember that. That actually happened. And so because of that, I'm in a very pensive space in my life. Not bad. Like I'm not feeling sad about any experiences. It's just pensive, like where I'm just trying to figure out the status before I start doing all the work, of course, together with my therapist. So that's where I'm at. With all that TMI, let's jump into the song of the week, which by the way, oh my goodness, I have to shout out a friend of mine, Soraya. She's such an awesome person, and she DM'd me this particular song and she was like, whenever I listen to the song, I think about you. I don't know if you've shared it on your podcast. I was like, no, I have not. In fact, I have never heard this song. But now that you mention it and I've gone and found it, it is awesome. So the name of the song is Worth It. It's by Amber Mark. Let me tell you, it's just one of those songs that like revalidates you when you're feeling a bit low, when you're doubting yourself. Turn this song on. So I'll put a link to the song in the show notes, but in case you're listening on a platform that doesn't avail the show notes to you, just look for Worth It, and it's by Amber Mark. Thank you, Soraya, for sharing that song with me. It is on my daily playlist now. Okay, let's jump into the story. As I mentioned earlier, it's part 1 of the story. Part 2 will come next week in next week's episode. I split them up because it's a very heavy story, and I think we just need to have a breather at a point. And also because even when I was recording it, Valentine sent... No, she didn't actually send the demo. She signed up on the storyteller form, and then I reached out to her, and when we were recording it, it took us just over 2 hours to record this story. It is a lot, but ultimately what it is about is her ex-husband being so vicious and mean, not only to her, but specifically to her son. 100 African stories on Legally Clueless. Stories from Africa.
Hi, my name is Valentine. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. So I got my son. He's now 15 years old. I met his father where we were both working. We were pretty young, in our 20s. He was younger than me. And then after about 1.5 years of dating, I got pregnant. When I was about 5-6 months pregnant, I discovered that he was in another relationship. And so we of course, we broke up. I went to live back home, and it was a very difficult pregnancy from an emotional and a physical perspective as well. And I gave birth in 2006 to my son, living with my folks, and it was tough first few years of his life, being first a young mom, a new mom, first time mom, and then of course with issues that had happened with my son's father. He totally vanished from our lives. So we popped in about once only when we were in the hospital and to see him, and maybe once thereafter at my parents' home, and then he disappeared. So I raised him up by myself from when he was born till now, essentially. We didn't part ways, what I would say, violently, or neither was it amicable. It was just having discovered what I discovered, I left our home, never went back, left everything in it, and just walked away and started a new life. And after my son was born, he didn't come after us and he didn't pursue us. So that just like ended what I would call a natural death, if I could put it that way. He had no interest in contact with him or looking for him, and so he's never seen him from when he was a few months old to date. During that time, my fears were largely about providing for my son, Yes, I had a job and I did the best that I could. However, shortly after my maternity leave ended and I went back to work, I got retrenched because I was in advertising and comm space, working in an agency. And the owner of the agency felt that as a new mom, I couldn't keep up with the the longer work hours. I had clients who were like in alcohol industry, etc. So he felt that I wouldn't be able to keep up with my accounts, and so I got retrenched. But I had good solid support from my family, from my folks, and from my siblings. And so I stayed home with him actually for about 1.5 years before I got another job. In hindsight, looking back, that was one of the best things that could ever have happened. I don't think many kids get to have that privilege of being home with mommy for that long. And so it kind of helps cement the bond that we have. And also him growing up in the same house with my folks and with my siblings coming over a lot really helped him a lot. And to date, still very close to his grandfather, who's my dad. We are very close to his grandmother, my mom. At the beginning, I never really told him about his dad, and he never asked. But when he then got into the early teens, about 10, 11, he asked for the first time. And so I just explained to him in an age appropriate way at that particular time that it didn't work out between me and his dad, but that if ever he wanted to meet his father or to talk with him, I would try and find a way for that to happen. But he's pretty content, and he said, he sees his his grandfather as his dad. So fast forward, when he was about 3 years old, then I met my ex-husband. We again workplace. When we started dating, he was just coming off his first marriage, also he said. About late 2009, I moved out of home, got my own place, and he came in and stayed with us. He had met my son by that time and was kind of friendly towards him. So when I got my own place, he came to live with us for a few months. He lasted about 3 months, then said it had a change of mind and wanted to try and make it work with his first family, and so he left. Then after about a year, he came back and said it hadn't worked out with his first wife. So he went through his divorce and everything, but when he came back, we started living together again. He went through his divorce and everything, and we started living together. I remember when I went to tell my folks about it, my dad had a question, and all he said was, I have seen you with his kids, because he had two kids, one from his married and another one from previous he had gotten previously, and he said, when I see you with his kids, I don't see the difference between how you treat your child and how you treat his kids, but when I see him with your son, I don't get the feeling that he's attached to him. And so I tried to explain and say, oh, it's different for men, and he'll get round to it, etc. And my dad kept saying that thing. About 2 years later, when we did the formal, what do you call it, Rurasho in Kikuyu, that's a community I come from. Again, my dad voiced the same concerns and said, I still don't see the connection. And he asked him to his face, are you going to take care of my grandson? And he said, yeah, I will. And they asked him, what's your current challenge with bonding with him? And he said, oh no, these things takes time, and that he would. We started life and living together. About 4 5 years after we started living together, then I got pregnant, and that I would say would have been like the first big red flag. There'd been others before, but I'd say that was the big one, because he turned around and said he never wanted more kids, and so was not supportive at all during that pregnancy. So for 9 months, again, I found myself alone, but this time married in a relationship. But as far as the pregnancy was concerned, I was alone. So went for all the doctor's visits by myself, all the prenatal clinics. He didn't want to talk about it at all. Never at any point asked how I was doing or how the child was doing. And the worst bit was that for actually 9 months, we never spoke. And I mean, living in the same house, but we never spoke. We would speak on chat, on SMS about mundane things, like home things, like this bill needs to be paid, this needs to be done, etc. But we did not have a husband-wife conversation in those 9 months. So in the last month, he seemed to turn around and be more open. So he bought a couple of things for the baby. But by that time, essentially, I'd more or less done everything, because I knew I was in it by myself. And the time came to go to the hospital to deliver. And again, I drove myself to the hospital. He said he was in meetings. I went in, and it was a scheduled CS, and I went in and got baby, get up from the anesthesia, see my baby, and happy to go home. And so when we go home with the baby, so during this time, I saw that he couldn't connect with my son at all, but it was kind of in a very reserved sort of back scenery thing. He would give him some weird rules for a kid who was at that age. When we got together, when he came to live with us, he was about 4 years old. So that is between when he's about 5 years old and 9 years old. So things about, don't sit on this seat, don't touch my TV, don't use this in the house, don't use that. When I come into the house, I want to have my time with my TV, so don't sit in the sitting room, go to your room. So things like that. But until that point, there was no open physical violence or anything like that, until when the baby was about 2 months old. So we had a routine because my son was in school at that point. So we had a routine whereby in the evening when he came from school after he did his homework, we would do bath time together for his baby sister. So and I would do the bath time in our bedroom. So he would come with me and we would prepare the bathing things and bath the baby. And then when we finished doing bath, I would be left feeding the baby, and then he would go to have his dinner. So on this day, it was a Sunday, and I usually used to give my nanny off for the weekend, so she wasn't home either. And my ex had gone out for a haircut and to the car wash. So we did our thing, and then he came when we were in the middle of bath time and everything, and I could hear him in the sitting room. Then a few minutes later, the doorbell rings, and I tell my son, just go and check who's ringing the bell, because I thought maybe it's the nanny who'd forgotten the keys to the gate. So my son goes, and then a few minutes later, he comes back running, and he's really crying, and he's holding his head, and I ask him, hey, what happened? And he says, Dad hit me. And that was the funniest thing, that through all this, he would always still call him Dad. You know, he never disrespected him. He never showed any animosity. And I would always tell him, you need to be respectful. Even if someone is treating you badly, just forgive them. Pray to God about it. Stuff like that. And then, so he came and said, Dad has hit me with the remote. And I can see a big bump has now formed on his head. I put the baby on the bed. I go and get an ice pack. I give it to my son. I didn't even go to ask him at that point. So I told my son, you go to your room and rest. So I finished feeding the baby and put the baby to sleep. I went and asked my son, so exactly what happened. So he said he went to open the gate, and it was the guard. And the guard gave him a message to give to my ex. And when he went to tell him, he just got angry and he hit him on the head with the remote, and he told him who gave him the right to open the gate without his consent and to come and give him messages from a guard, etc. So I went now to the sitting room and asked him, hey, what happened? Why would you hit him? That much for him to get a bump on his head. What is this that he did that's so bad? And he got really angry and started abusing me. Said so many things. Of course, I can't recall them word for word now, but I just said so many nasty things during that time. And so I also got angry and we got into an altercation. So in the midst of it all, he pushes me out of the house and he locks the gate. So I'm out. I have a 2 months old baby in the house. I have my son in the house, and the nanny is also in the house at this time. Luckily, I still had my phone in my hands, so I picked up my phone. I called my brother, and I told him, hey, this is what is happening. So he called my mom, and then my bro and his wife came. They tried to talk to him. Nothing much happened. He still wasn't opening. Finally, my mom came because she lived a bit far off. And then when she came, finally he opened. It was a very confusing time. It was my first time to experience physical violence at the hands of this person. It was also the first time for my son. Here I had a young baby, and somehow by morning he had said how sorry he was. It would not happen again, etc. So I actually didn't file a police report or anything, but I called the guy who'd been our best man, and I told him this is what is happening. Can you talk to your friend? He said he'd have a chat with him, and that's where we left it off. So I took my son to my mom's house to stay there for a bit so that he could just get away from it and also mentally and psychologically recover. And he's the one who told my folks that during this argument when he was being beaten, my ex called him a bastard. And so he was asking the grandmother, what does a bastard mean? So really hard to hear that, because you're trying to create a home for your child with this person, and it's like being torn in two different worlds, because I love my ex, I love my son, and yet he totally hated him, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. Like, how can you love me but you hate my child? So it was very, very traumatizing. Then I have a new baby, and maybe I'd have left at that point, but in hindsight, I think because of the new baby, I kept thinking that it will work because of this new baby, and because these two siblings would love each other, he would also somehow come to accept all of us. I tried to talk to his family, his sisters. They had a standard response that he's very one way, one street minded, and if he puts his mind to something, his mind can't be changed, etc. But I would say one of them tried a bit, but it never felt like that 100% support. Anyway, I continue, I stay. And from then on, of course, now their relationship went south completely. So it was always full of friction. I tried my best to hive out a life for my son that would ensure as little contact as possible with my ex. So a lot of after school activities that I would take him to that also served as a time we would spend together. Saturdays would go for football, just try and do, and then have him go stay with his cousins as often as possible, just so he would be out of reach of my ex whenever he was around, and to really like minimize the contact. The weird thing about this was whenever we'd visit like his home, his rural home where his father lived, he would not show that side at all, you know. So it was like kind of living in a bipolar world, if I could say that. Because when we went there, then he would even talk to him, send him to get a knife when they were slaughtering the goat, or to do this. And so it would leave me feeling very confused because the person there and the person at home was like totally different. And my son was also picking up on these things and would say them. I would also come across his journals and he would write and he would express the same things like, I don't understand why this person hates me so much. I don't understand why he's married to my mom and he hates me so much, you know. The privileges were different when his daughter came to stay with us, so 'cause she was staying with the mom. So the daughter was allowed to watch TV. She had access to the Wi-Fi, so many things that my son couldn't do as a normal teenager. So around 2015, we moved to a new neighborhood, and that was like another turn in the wheel, I would say, because because it was a better neighborhood, a better house, and just really goes to bring home that phrase that says, home is where the heart is. Sort of how big the house is. If it doesn't have love and warmth, then it's not a home. So he bought new furniture, some new seats and a new TV, and gave this laundry list to my son that I only got to discover later about he should not touch the new TV. And the one time he touched it, he was given a punishment to kneel on the road where all the neighbors' kids could see him for like 2 hours. And I get called by the nanny that the dada said he shouldn't get into the house until I get home. And it's like 7 p.m. So I'm in traffic coming from work. I get home like 8:30 p.m. And I find my son is locked in the room and he says he was told not to leave the room. He has not eaten, he's not showered. And I asked him, how would you punish a 10-year-old, 10-year-old to that extent, you know? And what he would do was he would always then just like go mom, you know, like just look at you and he's not talking. So that would used to be the seesaw of our marriage. So we'd have periods, 1, 2 months when we're in good times and we're talking, then he'd go quiet for 3, 4 months. Then would have another dip. It was actually like perpetually being on a roller coaster. In 2017, my son came and told me, you know what, mom, I think I'd like to try a boarding school. And we had a long chat about it. And he told me, yeah, the reason I want a boarding school is because I like it here with you and with my sister. But dad is always on my neck. So I'd like a boarding school because then it would minimize the time I'm at home. And then when I come for holidays, we can just do stuff with you and my sister when I come for midterm, and you guys can visit me in school. And I think I'll be better that way. And then he told me I'd like a school that also can help me pursue his extracurricular activities, what he likes doing. And so we shopped around and we got a school that he likes, and I took him off to boarding school. Having my child in boarding school again, I was so torn apart because I would go and visit him and he would be so happy in school, but then I missed him terribly, and the home just didn't seem complete. Yes, I had my daughter, but I always felt like I've abandoned him. I've chosen that option or agreed with him on that option because of cowardice or because I was unable to take a stance on what I needed to do. So December of 2017, Sunday morning, and preparing the kids to go to church. So I used to go to church with the kids only by myself. So I would prepare the baby and then have them leave them having their breakfast, and then I'd go to get ready so that we can leave. So that's what I do on that particular Sunday morning. So I get the baby ready and then I leave her downstairs with her brother while he's also having his breakfast, and then I go upstairs to get ready. And then when I come out of the bathroom, I find my ex is still in bed. So I get my stuff and I go downstairs and I find the baby by herself. So I'm wondering, where's my son and why did he leave? So I go back upstairs and I find him in his room. And so I ask him, what happened? Why did you come back upstairs and did not finish your breakfast and you're supposed to be watching the baby? And he says, oh, I was told to come and stay in my room. And my dad told me he never wants to see me in his face again, and he doesn't want us in the same space. And I was shattered and I was so devastated. I couldn't even figure out how to talk to him again. So I just told the kids, let's go and let's leave. So we went to church and I didn't even talk to him about it. I couldn't. For like 2 weeks, I couldn't say a single thing. And so I left, went to church. 2 weeks later, finally, just before Christmas, I sat him down and asked him, why would you tell that to a child again? He just responds with a one-liner that, yeah, probably I shouldn't have said that. Didn't apologize to him or anything, so I left it at that. We went to, again, his rural home for the holidays and came back. Shortly thereafter, I come home from work one day, and my daughter, and she was a baby then. She was about 2 years. She had not even turned 3. We're in a conversation, so we talk about her day in the evening, and she asks me, "Do you know this is what my Baba told me today?" And I said, "Oh, what were you told today?" And she says, "He told me never to speak about X again." So X being her brother and my son, not to ever tell him about him. Because I think maybe they were in a conversation and maybe she started saying what they do or something. And that was his response. And so again, I asked him, now you've taken this a notch higher because now you're poisoning essentially this child against her brother, you know? And they have a gap between them quite a number of years. So it was that relationship of she adores him, like, this is my big brother. And of course, to him, is like, this is my sister. She always very protective and everything. And those two things coming so close to each other just made me withdraw more and more. Around that time, I had applied for their passports at immigration. And so it was taking rather long to get them out. And so after a lot of back and forth and going to their offices, etc., I finally found out that he had written a letter to them to the effect that my son's passport should not be processed. And so that's why they were holding the file. But after going there and talking through with them and explaining to them what the situation was, they then told me what documentation I needed to submit because my son's birth certificate was blank, and he went ahead and told on the father's name, and he went ahead and told them that no, this child has a father, this is the father's name, and provided details of his name because I had told him about it. And so he should be on the child's documents, etc. Finally, it was processed because by that time we were in the new constitution, which states that birth certificates must have the father's names. Yeah, in this day and age, whether they want to or not. So we had to process a new one with the dad's name. And so at that time, again, we had to get into the conversation with him of, this is your dad's name. And this is, do you remember we talked about this is what happened? And I told him now what this means is that if you need to travel before you're 18 or anything, then we need to get his consent. And so I asked, do you want to meet him so that if we get to that, it's easier. He said, no, I'd prefer if you just got the consent from him and did that. And sure enough, a few months later, he had to go on a school trip. When I contacted the dad, he didn't have any qualms. He just said, I hope this doesn't mean that I need to be present. And I said no, but because you're on the birth certificate, then you just need to sign the documentation. And he did. So that's the one other time that I've had contact with him from when his son was born. So that again marked quite a shift, because again I was just getting jaded as time went on. So during that time we increasingly grew apart and I stopped trying. So before then I really used to try, even when he would have those periods of silence and what is it called, nil by mouth. I would really try to get into conversation, apologize even for things I hadn't done and stuff like that. But this time I just stopped. I just stopped and I said, until I get my head into a space where I know what I want to do with this marriage, let me just focus on my kids. And that's what I would do. I started cultivated my relationships again with my friends, with my family. I even stopped spending a lot of time with my family, because he had this thing of, oh, I don't want you talking to people about our stuff, and you guys are too tight, and if you tell them about us, stuff like that. And only now in hindsight, when I went for counseling later, is that the counselor told me, in just within a few visits, which we had done joint counseling when things got really bad, and she told me, you're dealing with a narcissist and this is what they do, and they pull you away from all the people that care about you, so that you feel so alone that you're unable even to voice about the things that are happening. So many people, my friends, even my family, sometimes other than the things my son would tell them, like the grandparents or his aunt, about what was happening, none of us ever spoke about it a lot. So on the outward, it looked like this fairy tale of these happy homes, happy marriages, but what was happening behind the walls was a really, really dark stuff, but very well hidden. So by then it was 2018, things were not good at all. And I remember going on several work trips and wishing the plane could be delayed. When you wish KQ can do their, Kenya Airways can do their thing, and so that I don't get home on time, because I really just didn't want to be there. First forward to late 2018, things then got really bad. By then, he had started monitoring all my, I think, tapping my phones, monitoring my movement stuff, questioning who I was with, what I was doing, who I was seeing, who I was talking to, being very emotionally abusive. He had always been, but then now this was a notch higher. Stuff like verbalizing it now, like, if you leave, where do you think? Because I think by then, having tapped my phones and snooped on my conversations, he knew, I was talking to a couple of people about the possibility of leaving. So stuff like, where would you go? Who would have you? etc. Who wants a single mom with two kids from two different fathers? Stuff like that. And then I found you when you're in your mother's house. Yes, you had a job, but you didn't even have a house. You didn't have anything. And I'd worked damn hard for what we had. I wasn't one of those people where he moved into my house. I bought stuff for that house. We contributed to purchasing that home that we were living in, both of us. So it wasn't like I was riding on his money or anything like that, but it would be made to be seem like I was such a damn good for nothing person who would never have amounted to anything were it not for him. Last straw, then you ask what eventually happened, for me to leave. And it was all those things kind of creeping up over the years. But then with the last few months, with all the abuse, and then someone constantly lecturing me, like every single day for the last 6 months, every morning and every night after work, it was just insults and abuse about what I wasn't doing. By this time, he had walked out of a very well paying job. He used to earn 5 or 6 times what I used to do. There was I'm paying bills for the house. I'm giving him an allowance. I'm doing so much, but I'm just getting, a lot of insults and stuff. And so the last straw came in the form of a very simple materialistic thing. if I could call it that. So I had a car which had been giving me issues, and then at that point in time, my sister had relocated. And so two things had happened. When she was relocating, the stuff that she wasn't putting in storage because she didn't want like to sell it, she'd asked myself and my bro to like pick out what we both needed or wanted and to keep it. So I'd gotten a few things from her, some beds for the kids, some bookshelves, curtains, just some home stuff, And then her car, she was also 50-50. She had said she might want to sell it depending on how long she thought she'd be away. But on the other hand, she was like, I'd rather sell it to someone I know and maybe someone who can sell it back to me, back to her when she came back. And so we reached an agreement, and I told her, okay, I'll keep it for you for a few months, like 4 months. When you come for your first holiday, you can have it for use because she's coming for like 3 weeks. And then after that, if you want to sell it, I can find a buyer for you. Then during that discussion, when my car started giving me issues, I asked her, hey, can I buy this car off you, but I'd have to like pay you in bits and pieces? And she was like, yeah, that's fine. So I actually had the courtesy to ask him, like, this is what I'm thinking of doing. And then he said, yeah, I think you need to buy it. In fact, like looking back, it was almost like pressure. Yeah, you need to buy it. Yeah, it would be good to have another car, etc. So I go ahead and we go ahead with the transaction. And then halfway there, he then flips on me. And it's because I later discovered he had come across a conversation between me and my sister where I'm confiding in her and telling her, I don't think this thing is working and I'd like to leave, but these are the things I'm thinking about. And so he said, saying, she's the bad influence on your life. She's the one who's telling you what to do in life. So in fact, I don't even want any of the stuff here. So all the stuff you got from her house when she was moving, I need you to take it away. And even this guy, I don't want it here. And so I took down the stuff. He went down to the extent of pulling down like all the family portraits that had me, my son, and my folks or my siblings in it. He pulled down all of them and threw them out. So I took all the stuff, put it in boxes, and took it to my office. Then one day I come home and I find at the gate the guards refuse to open, and they tell me, we've been told you can enter, but this car can't enter. So I park the car outside and walk in. It's one of those gated places, so it's like parking your car outside the estate. So I left the car and I would leave it there for about a week. Then I thought, okay, this is not safe even for this car. So I took it to a friend's place as I tried to clear my head. So I then asked, and he said, no, until I'm sure it's not a gift that you've actually paid for it, then that's when it will be allowed in. So I actually took a loan and paid my sister for it and then showed him the documentation. And he still had the nerve to like say, I've changed my mind. I don't want us to buy that car. So I flipped and I said, you know what? It's not up to you anymore. I bought it, and that's it. So I went to work, only to come back and find again the guards have been told not to let me in. And this time he'd actually done an email to the guards, to the security company, to the estate management committee, and everyone. So it was a whole like buzz, this is what is happening, etc. And so I got really pissed off. That's when I said, as I said, as what seemed like a simple materialistic thing is what flipped me over the edge. And so I wrote back and I told the guards they've got no right to stop me from entering. I'm also a co-owner in that place and I'm entitled to get into my own home. And of course, he saw the response and he came back and he was so livid. And it was a very nasty weekend. Of course, a lot of anger. He was throwing my stuff around. And the baby was there, and he was just saying all sort of nasty things. And so at that particular point, that's when I said, this is it. And so I was just waiting for the opportune moment. The following week, one day I went to work and I just couldn't settle. I just couldn't sit and work. And I just left everything, went back home, picked up my kids because my son was on half term with just the clothes we were wearing, and we left. And that's how I left, and that's how it ended. I was given shelter by one of my cousins. By this time, I told my sis this is what I wanted to do, and so they knew and they had discussed and they had found me a place to live. So when I left, I went and I stayed there, and then I filed for divorce and I filed for custody, and I thought it was going to be a normal process. The first hearing, when we went to court for the custody proceeding, we're in court. And so I'm there with my lawyer, and he's there with his lawyer at that time. I've left the kids with the nanny, and my folks are there as well with me in court. As we're in court, then his lawyer stands up and says they filed some papers and they wanted the magistrate to make a ruling. It's an urgent application. It's in the best interest of the children. The children are in danger, something. So I'm getting confused. I'm like, what's happening? And so my advocate then says they've just received the papers that morning, and he says they would need time to review and to consult. And so the magistrate declines to give the orders because they were asking for the kids to be separated, and I didn't understand why at that point.
Catch more African stories in the next episode of Legally Clueless. That is part 1 of Valentine's story. Part 2 will be in episode 119, aka next week's episode. And to be quite frank, you normally hear these stories. This is not the first story, well, personally, that I've heard of a step-parent really being vicious and abusive to the child that is not biologically theirs. But to really, I don't know, there's a way she did it in just being so vulnerable and open with us, where you really go through the paces of what that looks like on a day-to-day. So I remember when I was recording this story, when she started talking about the court process, I was like, no, after everything you've been through, surely you deserve this to be an effortless break. And the turns this story took really had me just looking at human beings, like, how can one person be this mean? You've already done so much damage. Hands down, this is definitely one story that's going to sit with me for the rest of my life. But as I said, the second part of the story will be in next week's episode. In the meantime, do remember, just like Valentine did, you too can share your story on this podcast. If you check out the show notes, there's a link to a form that if you want to share a story on this podcast, you just fill in the form and I'll get back to you. Alternatively, you can record a 1-minute story demo, send that to the Legally Clueless hotline via WhatsApp, and then I'll get back to you on that front. So the Legally Clueless hotline, aka WhatsApp number, is +254 768 628 790. Also remember that this podcast plays on Trace Radio in Kenya every Monday and Wednesday at 12 noon and 7 p.m. and every Friday at 12 noon as well. So head over to traceradio.co.ke for a list of all the frequencies that you can catch this podcast on there. For those of you who are in Kenya, and of course on that website, you can also stream Trace Radio there as well. As mentioned earlier, audio episodes got every Monday morning, and the video series, we're really close to wrapping season 1. You can check that out on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As I said, I'm not going to talk too much in this one. Navigating some shit in my life. So send me all the grace as possible, and I'll catch you in next week's episode. That's it for this episode of Legally Clueless. You can share this podcast with your friends. You can keep it for yourself. I'm not judging. Just make sure you're here next week for the next episode.